Was there ever a time you cried in your own watching your own premiere
Oh, I did for
because of the
Toy
movie?
Story 3,
Really?
for Toy Story 3, and I did for Coco.
Oh my gosh, that's my favorite movie. I've got a Mexican girlfriend, and so her whole family is from Mexico, and just whenever they come over to our house, it feels like I'm in Coco, in America. And whenever I go to Mexico, it feels like I'm in Coco. So for me, that's one of my favorite movies of all movies. It's incredible.
Well, it was Lee Unkrich. It actually created a problem because it was so good that afterwards, Lee says, where do I go from
It
here?
was unbelievable.
But
You cried in Coco.
and incidentally, he directed both of those films.
Wow. You cried in Coco.
Oh, yeah.
What part made you?
Well, it was the thing about any good movie of this sort, or the kind of movies that we try to tell, is that you are trying to connect to our own personal emotions, but you're also trying to bring in something new and original. Because to be honest, there's unfortunately sort of this bias against the Mexican culture, because what do people hear about on the news in terms of immigration or various things at the border? But they don't represent Mexico, and they don't represent what takes place like in southern Mexico with, the Day of the Dead. I mean, if you say the Day of the Dead in America, it's like, oh, that's kind of odd, the Day of the Dead. But it means something entirely different there. It's like the respect for the people that came before us. That's what it's about. So, and you actually get that in the movie. So they went down into the villages in southern Mexico, and they spent a lot of time getting to know the people, talking with them. We had a group in California. They were like Mexican advisors because we wanted to get it right. I mean, essentially, you got these people from North America going down into Mexico. I mean, they're in North America too. So you got people, from America going down. Well, how are they going to tell that story? So they worked really hard to try to capture that. The same was true with like Moana. It's like you
Another
go
great
in,
movie. Incredible.
and you actually try to get something from the culture, because you don't want to work off the biases.
Right.
You don't want to work off of what other people are thinking. And the same was true with Ratatouille. It's like, we all know cooking in the home. We watched our parents cook, or we cook. We watch the cooking channel. You can see the chefs in the kitchen. But what is it like to actually be in a highly rated, fancy restaurant in any place? What's the culture like? We don't know that. So for Ratatouille, they went into those restaurants. They got to know them, and they also were given some work. Like at the French Laundry, they actually spent time in the kitchen, and they were given jobs to do.
Wow.
So they were capturing that. Now, what's interesting about it is even though we know a lot about cooking, we don't know whether or not what they're saying in the kitchen, the way they're acting, is true. All right? We just don't know. But they sense that it is. If you've actually done your research and you put that in the film, then there's something that is conveyed to people because you took the time to find out something new and original. So in the case of Coco, it was to go down and find out, how do they feel about it? What are they doing? What are they thinking? And I remember, this is when the movie came out, because we went down to the premiere, and one of the things I appreciate is that when Americans make movies about Mexico, they don't know the difference between the Mexican broad-brimmed hat and the Spanish one. So they'll interchange them. But in Mexico, they know. So they went down there, and they wanted to get those details right. And most of the audiences, they wouldn't know. But they felt like you need to have the people who would know that it was right.
Sure. What was a part of the movie that emotionally captivated you the most in Coco?
Well, it was, I mean, because the intent was, it actually is the respect for these people that came before. It's like, because it was real. You know, he'd learned something, he figured out something about the people that came before him. He also felt like he was able to fix some things that were wrong. But it was also emotional for me for a couple other reasons too. One is in the storytelling was that initially Lee was going to make this as Pixar's first musical, because Pixar really doesn't have musicals in their DNA. Disney does, and Pixar doesn't. And one of the things I want to make sure is that we didn't try to make one studio like the other. We also weren't trying to say you have to be different. So they had to evolve in their own way. So if one wants to make a musical, then they can. And at Pixar, if they want to make a musical, they can. And so Lou was going to be the first person to do that. So we got these brilliant two people who also had done something down at Disney. So, I mean, they were, good and close, and we worked with them before. And so they wrote the first song for his movie, which is called Remember Me.
Incredible.
And so, but as a filmmaker, he said, okay, that's thematic for the movie. So now he builds a story using this song throughout it. All right, so it's now a key element of where did it come from, why was it written, and the notion was that, if his great-grandma dies, that she's the last person who will know where the song came from. And she's got...
Oh my God, she remembers it. Yeah.
And she's got Alzheimer. It's so emotional, actually.
I know.
But by playing it, and she remembers, it actually gives him life. So, wow. Is seeing that and conveying that
it's beautiful.
Makes it powerful.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing about the story, which is a separate thing, was like, how did it get started? So one of the things we figured out, this very early on in Pixar, when we started our second movie, well, the second was Bug's Life, but the third one was going to be a sequel. No sequel had ever been successful, right? An animated sequel had ever been successful. So the thought was originally by Disney was that this is going to be a direct video. So we start to make it, but right away it's clear that the people working on it at Pixar are very upset, because to work on a sequel at a studio where we want to have the highest standard of quality means that we're working on something where the expectations is much lower. We don't want to do something where there are low expectations. We want it to be, at a high level. So Disney agreed to that. So we then started to make this film, and we frankly had several problems with it, because we were building on some assumptions that we got from the first film. Because the first film had been built knowing nothing, but we drew some conclusions from it, and some of the conclusions we drew from it were not correct. So we started the sequel based on those assumptions, only to find that we were wrong. And we just uncovered a bunch of things to question or challenge our original ideas. So, and in the process of doing that, we had to restart the movie really late in the game and remake it. It was like a brutal effort to remake this movie. We had to make it in 8 months, starting from scratch almost. Oh yeah, it was a nightmare. We had like a third of our people injured with RSI.
Oh man.
And But one of the things that came out of that was the realization that the way we were starting films is we were trying to do what other studios do, which was to have a development department looking for good scripts. And so our thought was, why are we trying to copy the model of other studios? First of all, the success rate of films at other studios isn't very high.
Low, yeah.
So we said, let's do it a different way. So what we did was, we're going to pick somebody who we think can direct a feature film. And then we're going to say to them, pick 3 ideas to develop. So now, the reason we say 3 is, instead of saying, pick an idea that you want to make into a film. Well, what happens to all of us when you do something tough or in school or something like that? You start to bang your head against the wall, you get stuck. So the reason we said 3 was why is that if you get stuck, you can switch to a different idea.
Right.
So they'd have an artist, and at some point they may have a writer come in and work with them. So it's like a really small team spending a year, and then some help with the development department. We still had the development department, but they were no longer looking for scripts to turn into movies. Their job was to help support this small group. So they read scripts, but all they were looking for was good writers who could join the team, but we never made anybody else's script. We always
Started from scratch.
Wow. So they would then spend that year going back and forth between their 3 ideas. And at the end of the year, they would come in, the 2 or 3 people who were now the leaders over this, and they would pitch it to the creative leadership of the company, say some of the other directors. So there may be like 10, 12 people in the room.
These 3 ideas.
The 3 ideas. And the way this works is, there's a story room, which there's a table in the middle, and so essentially you can hold like 12 people in the room. And there are 2 long walls, and there's storyboards along the wall, and they would cover them up. So they'd put the material, the conceptual ideas for the film on the wall, and they'd take like 20, 25 minutes, present the idea, there'd be a brief discussion on it, and then we go through the 3 films. Now the process started, and they all did this, even though they'd been on the other side, like they'd been on the creative leadership side, and then there'd be time when they'd pitch their ideas. And they'd all start saying the same thing. They would say, I love all 3 ideas equally.
Right.
It doesn't matter to me which one you pick. Now, it's not true. They do like one better. And the debate when they leave the room is not which is the best idea to make into film. It is, which one do they really want to make? And I think we've always called it right, because we'd come back and they'd go, yes, I was hoping you'd pick that one.
Sure.
But in the case of Coco, Pete came in and he pitched an idea which is related to an idea that he pitched before he did Toy Story 3. And then when we had the ability to make Toy Story 3, he was asked to direct it, and so he switched over along with the writer he'd worked with, Michael Arndt, brilliant writer. And they developed a good relationship. So basically Lee was pitching that idea they originally had. Then he pitched his second idea, which was to be a full-on musical. An interesting concept, challenging concept. And then the 2 walls were up, so then we go into the other room. So we open the door, and when we open the door, the table, the ceiling, both walls and the end wall are filled with Mexican artwork.
Really?
So there isn't a single word that's said, and everybody knows which movie we're making.
Yeah, there's There's a poster pose of the first two, but this one is a whole experience.
That's right.
You walked into Coco world.
That's right. You walk in the Coco world.
Wow.
Now, the interesting part, which this is the way it works, is the final movie actually was very little like that first thing. It didn't matter.
Right.
Because you start off with the concept. You're going to learn something. The whole idea of all these trips to Mexico was to learn something, because everything else is sort of based on, kind of things you knew.
Right.
Because you're interested in
Stereotypes
and so forth. So you expect it to change pretty dramatically in the process of doing it.
So when he pitched Coco, and you guys went back and decided, like, okay, this is the movie we're choosing of these three, was there a debate, or was everyone just like, oh, we know he's the most passionate about this idea, let's let him run with the thing he's most passionate about?
Well, I think in that case there probably wasn't any debate. I would say with others there is some question about, okay, which one is it? But that's probably more than normal. Like, there'd be a little debate about it.
Right.
And also, not everybody goes through the process. Like, if Andrew Stanton says he wants to make something, it's like, okay, Andrew, you can make whatever you want.
Sure. Now, with the case of like something like Moana, is there ever a place where you're like, okay, we've got this big star that wants to do a movie with us, let's come up with a concept? Or is it Moana, then who's the right fit for a movie like this, where The Rock was a great fit for one of the characters, obviously? How does that process look like?
Oh, it's the story first. Then you're looking for the voices that can fit. And actually, when he picked Tom Hanks, he wasn't the big star. He was after he signed up for us, and he actually became a big star.
Really?
He'd done some things that were.
He hadn't done Forrest Gump yet, on TV, or
no? This bigger stuff took place later,
after Toy Story. Yeah.
Yeah, there was one film. I forget
Big.
which one it was. I think it was Big. Big took place after we signed up with them, but before the film came out.
Really? After you signed up for Toy Story?
Yeah, I think that was. All I know is when we first got him, he was moderately well known. Then he became really big, and also with films, you tend to get people who are a little more on the comedic side because they have that ability to convey something. Because films essentially have multiple layers. So you've got a visual layer, which works really well for younger people. And we don't try to aim too young, because we're not trying to, some of the films clearly are too intense for, and depending on the child, 4 or 5 or 6 or something like that. And then some of the verbal things are more sophisticated. So kids wouldn't actually know what they are. But there's 2 interesting phenomena that come from this. One of them is that it's very interesting when you're looking at body language and it tells you one thing, but what they're saying is something different. So we're kind of wired to recognize that what they're saying isn't matching what they're either doing or what their body is saying. That's interesting. So the good animators and directors and storytellers actually recognize the value of doing that and the skill set that comes with it. And the other thing was, and Walt Disney understood this, was that if you have something which has got the multiple layers, and sometimes only the adults would understand it, people forget, kids live in an adult world. They're used to having people talk about things and they don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
So one of the reasons they watch movies multiple times is they're trying to figure it out. So it becomes a learning experience. So, you want to, so adults can watch it and enjoy it. Because otherwise, there's some animated films where you kind of shoot yourself, right? So, okay, this may be for 4-year-olds, but I'm sorry.
I can't watch it, yeah.
I can't watch it, or, I'll have my child on my lap because I want to have
Sure.
my close bonding with him
Sure.
while I'm looking at a book,
Right.
doing something on
Right.
my iPad or whatever until the child takes over the iPad. And Steve actually understood that was never the point. It was, you want to get to the truth quickly. But he also understood that at an intuitive level, that because of the power of his personality, it actually could distort the process.